Lila Graham's seemingly perfect life is shattered when she uncovers her husband Ethan's affair. As betrayal unfolds, Lila finds herself trapped in a toxic marriage, manipulated by Ethan's lies and deceit. Seeking justice, Lila begins a fierce battle for her children's custody, uncovering shocking secrets along the way. But just when she thinks she's taken control, Ethan retaliates, using their kids to further manipulate her. With unexpected allies and devastating truths emerging, Lila's journey becomes one of revenge, self-discovery, and ultimate empowerment. Will she reclaim her life, or will Ethan's hold on her be too strong to break? It was the summer of 2019, a year filled with promises and plans. In a quiet suburb just outside Atlanta, Georgia, nestled in a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a freshly painted porch swing, the Graham family seemed like a postcard-perfect picture of happiness. But even the prettiest pictures can hide the deepest cracks. The Grahams were the kind of family you'd see in a neighborhood newsletter. Ethan Graham, 42, was a financial advisor, sharp in his suits and sharper with his words. A self-made man, he carried an air of authority that could make anyone feel both in awe and uneasy. His wife, Lila, 39, was the counterpoint to his sharpness. Warm, artistic, the kind of woman who could turn a grocery store bouquet into a centerpiece that looks like it came straight out of a lifestyle magazine. Together, they had built a life that appeared enviable. Their 2 kids, Mia and Caleb, were the glue that held the illusion together. One excelling in piano, the other in soccer. From the outside, life looked seamless. But inside their house on Willowbrook Lane, something else was brewing. It started small, as these things often do. Lila had recently taken up a part-time position managing events at the local community center. It was the kind of job that gave her just enough freedom to still be there for the kids, while indulging her creative side. Ethan had encouraged it, or so it seemed. He always said the right things, the kind of phrases that would make any outsider believe he was supportive, but Lila knew better. He liked control, and this new job took a little of that away from him. It gave her a sliver of independence. And that sliver was where it all began. One Friday evening, Ethan came home later than usual. His shirt was rumpled, and the faint smell of someone else's perfume lingered on him, though he waved it off as a working dinner with clients. Lila didn't press. She had learned not to Ethan wasn't the kind of man who dealt well with questions. He had a way of turning even the most innocent inquiry into an interrogation of her own insecurities. "Long day?" Lila asked casually as she set a plate down on the table. "You could say that," Ethan muttered, barely glancing at her as he loosened his tie. "Where are the kids?" "Caleb's at practice. Mia's upstairs finishing her science project." "Good quiet night then." Lila nodded, but there was something in his tone. A detachment that had become all too familiar over the past few months. She watched him as he scrolled through his phone, his face illuminated by the bluish glow of the screen. A smile flickered across his lips. But it wasn't for her. He didn't even notice her watching. And that's when it hit her. She had become invisible. The next morning, Lila dropped Caleb off at soccer and decided to grab a coffee at the local cafe. It was one of those small, cozy spots that smelled like roasted beans and freshly baked muffins. She found herself a corner table and pulled out her notebook, jotting down ideas for an upcoming fundraiser. She was so engrossed in her work that she didn't notice when someone sat down across from her. "Lila Graham, right?" She looked up, startled, and was met with a friendly smile. The man was about her age, maybe a little older, with dark hair that curled at the edges and an easy charm about him. He looked vaguely familiar, though she couldn't place him. "I'm Adam Carter," he said, extending a hand. "We met at the community center. You're organizing the gala next month." "Oh, right," Lila said, shaking his hand. "Of course, sorry. My mind's all over the place." No problem, I just wanted to say you're doing a great job with the fundraiser. The board can be, let's say, particular. Lila laughed, feeling the tension ease. That's one way to put it. The two talked for a while, and for the first time in months, Lila felt seen. Adam wasn't just polite, he seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. He asked about her ideas for the gala, suggested a few connections he could help her make, and even offered to donate a few pieces of artwork from his gallery for the auction. By the time she left the cafe, her mood had shifted. It wasn't anything monumental, just a small reminder that she wasn't invisible to everyone. That afternoon, she mentioned the conversation to Ethan in passing. His reaction was predictably dismissive. Adam Carter, the art guy, isn't he the one who couldn't keep his gallery afloat a few years ago? I think he's doing fine now, Lila said, trying to keep her tone neutral. Well, just be careful with people like that. They're always looking for an angle. Lila didn't respond. She'd learned that trying to argue with Ethan was like shouting into the wind. He always found a way to twist her words, to make her feel like she was the one who didn't understand how the world worked. But as the weeks passed, her conversations with Adam became more frequent. At first, it was just about the fundraiser. They'd exchange emails, then texts, and eventually, quick coffee meetings turned into longer lunches. Lila told herself it was harmless. They were colleagues, after all, working on the same project. But deep down, she knew there was more to it. She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it happened, but somewhere along the line, she started looking forward to their meetings a little too much. She'd linger in front of her closet, choosing outfits with a care she hadn't felt in years. She'd catch herself smiling at her phone when his messages popped up. And when she was with him, the tension she carried around Ethan melted away. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with Ethan about a forgotten dinner reservation, Lila found herself typing a message to Adam. Are you free to talk? I just need to get out of here for a bit. His reply came almost instantly. Of course, meet me at the park. She slipped out of the house, the cool evening air brushing against her skin as she made her way to the small park near their neighborhood. Adam was already there, leaning against a bench, his face lighting up when he saw her. What's wrong? He asked gently. Lila hesitated, the weight of everything pressing down on her. And then, as if a dam had broken, she told him everything. The arguments, the distance, the loneliness that had become her constant companion. Adam listened, his expression soft but unreadable. When she finished, he reached out and touched her hand lightly. You don't deserve this, Lila. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She didn't pull her hand away. Lila sat with Adam in the dim glow of the park's streetlights, her hand still resting in his. The quiet between them wasn't awkward. It was heavy with a mix of emotions neither had fully acknowledged. She pulled her hand back slowly, breaking the spell. I shouldn't have come, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why not? Adam asked, his gaze steady. Because it feels like something it shouldn't, she admitted, her eyes fixed on the playground in the distance. I'm married, Adam. I know, he said softly. But are you happy? Lila opened her mouth to reply, but stopped happy. When was the last time she had felt that Ethan's face flashed in her mind? Not the Ethan she had now, but the Ethan she married. The one who used to bring her flowers just because. The one who looked at her like she was the only person in the room. That version of him felt like a stranger now. I need to go, she said, standing abruptly. Thank you for listening. Adam didn't try to stop her. He simply nodded, his eyes full of understanding as she walked away. But as Lila drove home, her thoughts were tangled. What had started as innocent conversations now felt like a door she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through, but couldn't bring herself to close either. The next few weeks were a blur of tension. Ethan grew more irritable, snapping at small things, while Lila buried herself in her work at the community center. She told herself she was focusing on the fundraiser, but her thoughts often drifted to Adam. The way he listened, the way he made her feel seen, appreciated. It was a stark contrast to the cold indifference that had taken root in her marriage. One evening, Ethan came home in a foul mood. He slammed his briefcase onto the kitchen counter, startling Lila as she prepped dinner. "Is everything okay?" she asked cautiously. "Do I look like everything's okay?" he snapped, pouring himself a whiskey without waiting for her response. Leela sighed, setting the knife down. "You can't keep talking to me like that, Ethan." "Like what?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I've had a long day, Lila. Sorry if I'm not all sunshine and rainbows." "It's not just today," she said, her frustration bubbling over. "You've been like this for months. Distant, angry. It's like you don't even care anymore." Ethan turned to face her, his jaw tightening. "Don't start, Lila." "Not tonight." But she didn't back down. "No, Ethan, I'm serious. When was the last time you even asked me how I'm doing or spent time with the kids? You come home, pour a drink, and act like we're just accessories to your life." He stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, without a word, he grabbed his drink and headed to his office, slamming the door behind him. Lila stood there, her hands trembling. This wasn't how she had imagined her life. And as much as she wanted to fix things, she was starting to wonder if they were beyond repair. As the fundraiser approached, Lila and Adam spent more time together. Their meetings stretched longer, their conversations growing more personal. One afternoon, as they finalized the seating chart, Adam leaned back in his chair and studied her. "You're different," he said, his tone thoughtful. "Different how?" she asked, glancing up from the spreadsheet. "You're carrying the weight of something, but you don't let it show, at least. Not to most people." Lila's heart skipped a beat. "You're pretty observant. Years of running an art gallery. You learn to read people." She smiled faintly, but didn't respond. Adam didn't press, and they returned to their work, but his words lingered. He saw her in a way Ethan hadn't in years. And that realization made her feel both exhilarated and terrified. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and the community center was transformed. Twinkling lights hung from the ceiling. Tables were adorned with elegant centerpieces, and the soft hum of conversation filled the room. Lila floated through the event, her smile fixed in place as she greeted guests and ensured everything ran smoothly. Adam caught her eye from across the room, offering her a warm smile. She smiled back, but her stomach twisted. Ethan was there too, though he had spent most of the evening engrossed in conversations with other businessmen, barely acknowledging her. At one point, as she adjusted the floral arrangement on a nearby table, Adam appeared beside her. "You've outdone yourself," he said. "Thank you," she replied, keeping her voice light. "You look beautiful tonight," he added, his voice softer. Lila's breath caught, but she forced a laugh. "Careful, Adam people might hear you." "Let them," he said with a playful grin, though his eyes held something deeper. "You deserve to hear it." Before she could respond, Ethan appeared, his expression unreadable. "Lila," he said, his tone curt. "I need to talk to you." She glanced at Adam, who stepped back politely. Ethan led her to a quiet corner, his hand gripping her arm a little too tightly. "What was that about?" he demanded. "What was what?" she asked, pulling her arm free. "Don't play dumb, Lila. I saw the way he was looking at you." "You're imagining things," she said, though her heart raced. "Am I?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Because if there's something going on, you'd better tell me now." "There's nothing going on," she lied, her voice steady. "Not that you'd notice if there was. You're too busy being miserable to see anything." Ethan's eyes flashed with anger, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her hands trembling. In the days that followed, Ethan's behavior grew colder. He barely spoke to her, and when he did, his words were clipped and laced with suspicion. Lila threw herself into work, but even that couldn't distract her from the growing tension at home. One evening, as she sat alone in the living room, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Adam. "I'm here if you need to talk." She stared at the screen, her heart torn. She knew the right thing to do was to distance herself, but right and easy are rarely the same. After a moment of hesitation, she replied, "Thank you, I might take you up on that." The decision felt like crossing a line, one she wasn't sure she could uncross. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you're enjoying the story so far. There's more drama and twists to come, so stick around for what happens next. The tension in the Graham household was becoming unbearable. Ethan's silent glares and Lila's quiet defiance had turned their once warm home into a battleground. Even Caleb and Mia, normally oblivious to adult arguments, had started to notice the chill in the air. One morning, Lila was sipping her coffee in the kitchen when Ethan entered, his phone in hand. Without looking up, he tossed a folded piece of paper onto the counter in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, setting down her mug. "A client sent it to me," Ethan replied coldly. Lila unfolded the paper, her stomach sinking as she read the printed text. It was a screenshot of a message thread between her and Adam. The messages weren't overly suggestive, but they hinted at a closeness that was undeniable. Her heart raced. "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" Ethan said, leaning against the counter with a smirk that barely hid his fury. "The better question is, what the hell is this?" Lila's mouth went dry. She tried to summon a response, but the words tangled in her throat. Finally, she managed, "It's nothing, Ethan. Just work conversations." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Work conversations, Lila. Don't insult me. I've been around enough liars to know one when I see one." The accusation cut deep, but Lila forced herself to stay calm. "Believe what you want, Ethan. But you don't get to play the victim here." "Oh, don't I?" he said, his voice rising. "While I've been busting my ass for this family, you've been running around with some guy from the community center. Tell me, how far has this gone?" Her silence was answer enough. That confrontation marked a turning point. Ethan, ever the calculating strategist, didn't explode as she expected. Instead, he withdrew, becoming colder and more distant. Lila, in turn, began spending more time away from home, leaning on Adam more heavily than ever. But Ethan wasn't idle. He began digging, using his network of contacts to uncover everything he could about Adam Carter. It didn't take long for him to find the weak points: financial troubles, a failed marriage, and whispers of a similar friendship with another married woman years ago. Armed with this information, Ethan waited for the right moment to strike. One evening, Lila and Adam met at a quiet bar on the outskirts of town. The lights were dim, the music soft, a perfect hideaway for two people who didn't want to be seen. They sat in a corner booth, their heads close as they talked. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," Lila admitted, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "Every day feels like a battle." "You don't have to keep fighting," Adam said, reaching for her hand. "You deserve more than this. Lila, more than him." She looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "It's not that simple." "It can be," Adam said, his voice firm. "Leave him start over. We can figure this out together." Lila hesitated, the weight of his words pressing down on her deep down. She knew he was right. But starting over wasn't just about her. It was about her kids, her home, the life she had built, flawed as it was. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Ethan. "Home now. The single word sent a chill through her. She looked at Adam, her expression troubled. "I have to go." When Lila arrived home, Ethan was waiting for her in the living room. He was calm, too calm, which only made her more nervous. On the coffee table sat a stack of papers and a laptop open to an email thread. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the armchair across from him. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary. "This," Ethan said, his tone icy, "is everything I've learned about your little friend." He slid a file across the table. Lila opened it, her stomach turning as she read through the documents. Adam's bankruptcy records, a copy of his divorce filing, even a restraining order from years ago. This isn't who he is," she said weakly. "Isn't it?" Ethan countered, his eyes boring into hers. "Or is it just not who you wanted him to be?" Lila looked away, her hands trembling. "What do you want from me, Ethan?" "I want the truth," he said, "and I want it now." Over the next few days, the fragile détente between them shattered completely. Ethan began using the information he had gathered to manipulate and corner Lila. He hinted at exposing her to the community, threatening to ruin her reputation and take the kids if she didn't end things with Adam. "You think anyone's going to side with you?" he sneered during one of their arguments. "You're a cheater. Lila, a liar. They'll see that." But Lila wasn't as weak as he thought. For years, she had let him control the narrative, but now she was done playing the passive role. The climax came one fateful evening when Ethan invited Adam to their home under the pretense of talking things out. Lila protested, but Ethan wouldn't hear it. "I think it's time we all got on the same page," he said with a chilling smile. When Adam arrived, the tension was palpable. Ethan greeted him with an air of smug superiority, while Lila stood frozen, her heart pounding. "I thought it would be good for us to clear the air," Ethan said, pouring himself a drink. "After all, we're practically family now, aren't we, Adam?" Adam shifted uncomfortably, his usual confidence faltering under Ethan's glare. "I'm not sure what you're getting at." "Oh, I think you do," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. "You see, Adam, I know all about you. The failed businesses, the affairs, the lies. And I have to say, I'm impressed you've got quite the track record." "Ethan, stop," Lila said, her voice shaking. "This isn't helping." "Isn't it?" Ethan shot back, his tone sharp. "I think it's helping a lot." Adam stood, his fists clenched. "If you've got something to say it." Ethan smirked, clearly enjoying the power he held. "You're not going to win, Adam. Not her. Not this. So why don't you do us all a favor and walk away?" Lila stepped between them, her voice breaking. "Enough, both of you." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. For a moment, no one moved. Then, without another word, Adam turned and left, slamming the door behind him. Lila's world was unraveling, but she wasn't ready to give up. She knew she needed to make a choice, not just between Ethan and Adam, but between the person she had been and the person she wanted to become. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you're enjoying the twists and turns of this story, the conclusion is just around the corner, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Lila sat alone in the kitchen after Adam stormed out. The air in the house was heavy. Every corner of the room a reminder of how far things had spiraled out of control. Ethan stood leaning against the doorframe, his expression unreadable. "Well," he said finally, breaking the silence. "That went about as well as I expected." "Is that what you wanted?" Lila snapped, her voice trembling with anger and exhaustion. "To humiliate him? To humiliate me?" Ethan smirked, sipping his whiskey. "I wanted to show you who he really is, but maybe you needed to see who you've become." The words stung more than she wanted to admit. Lila looked down at her hands, her mind racing. There was no denying she had made mistakes, but Ethan's cruelty was pushing her further away. She had tried to salvage something from the wreckage of their marriage, but now, she wasn't sure what was left to save. The next few days passed in tense silence. Ethan, emboldened by his confrontation with Adam, began pressing harder. He called meetings with divorce lawyers under the guise of wanting to protect the kids, and hinted to mutual friends about Lila's distractions. It was his way of controlling the narrative, of ensuring he looked like the victim in all of this. But Lila was no longer willing to sit back and let him dictate the terms of her life. One afternoon, while Ethan was at work, Lila made a decision. She retrieved an old box from the attic, one filled with photos, letters, and memories from their early years together. She sifted through them, her emotions swinging wildly between nostalgia and grief. Among the items was a journal she hadn't touched in years, its pages filled with the hopes and dreams she had once carried. As she flipped through the journal, a realization hit her. She had spent so much of her life living for Ethan, bending to his will, suppressing her own voice. She couldn't go back to that. Not now. Not ever. She called Adam. "I need to see you," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around her. "Are you sure?" Adam asked, hesitation in his tone. "I am, but not at your place or the park, somewhere different, neutral." They met at a nearby botanical garden, the vibrant flowers and serene pathways, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside. Lila Adam was already there when she arrived, sitting on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. He stood as she approached, his expression cautious. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted, "but I needed to talk to you." They sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of birds chirping filling the gap between them. Finally, Lila spoke. Whatever this is between us, it can't keep going the way it has," she said, her voice firm but tinged with sadness. "I've made mistakes, big ones, but I need to fix my life before I can even think about what comes next." Adam nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I get it, I really do, and I don't want to make things harder for you." "You've been there for me in ways I didn't even know I needed," Lila said, "but right now, I need to focus on my kids, on figuring out who I am without Ethan's shadow over me." Adam reached for her hand but stopped short, his fingers hovering just above hers. "If you ever need me, really need me, you know where to find me." Lila nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She stood, offering him a faint smile before walking away. For the first time in months, she felt like she was finally making a choice for herself. When Lila returned home, Ethan was waiting for her, his expression guarded. He had been acting differently since the night with Adam. Not kinder, but more calculated, as if he were trying to anticipate her every move. "Where were you?" he asked, his tone neutral but probing. "Out," Lila said simply, meeting his gaze without flinching. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Out where?" "Does it matter?" she replied, her voice calm. "You've already decided what you think of me, so why should I bother explaining?" Her defiance seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, Ethan didn't respond, his expression flickering between anger and confusion. "Fine," he said finally, turning away. "Do whatever you want, but don't forget, you're not the only one with something to lose here." As the weeks passed, the tension in the house continued to simmer. Lila focused on her kids, throwing herself into their lives in a way she hadn't been able to before. She attended Caleb's soccer games, helped Mia with her science project, and tried to create a sense of normalcy amid the chaos. But Ethan wasn't done playing games. One evening, Lila came home to find Ethan in the living room, his laptop open on the coffee table. He didn't look up as she entered, but his posture was tense. "What's going on?" she asked warily. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, his tone measured. Maybe it's time we make some changes. Changes? Lila echoed, her stomach tightening. For the kids' sake, he continued, finally meeting her gaze. We should start discussing custody arrangements and the house. The implication was clear. Ethan wasn't just considering divorce. He was planning to take everything. You can't be serious, Lila said, her voice shaking. Dead serious, Ethan replied, his eyes cold. You've made your choices, Lila. Now it's time to live with them. But Lila wasn't the same woman she had been a few months ago. She straightened her back, meeting his glare with one of her own. You don't scare me anymore, Ethan, she said. Do what you have to do, but don't think for a second that I'll let you take my kids. Ethan smirked, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Lila turned and walked away, her heart pounding. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years she felt ready to fight for it. The climax was coming, and the stakes had never been higher. Ethan was pulling every string he could to maintain control, but Lila was done playing by his rules. The battle lines were drawn, and the final confrontation was just around the corner. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to stay updated on the twists and turns of this story. You won't want to miss what happens next. The days leading to the inevitable showdown between Lila and Ethan were marked by a tense, almost suffocating atmosphere in the Graham household. The once familiar spaces of their home now felt like a battlefield, every interaction charged with unspoken accusations and barely contained resentment. Lila spent her time preparing for what she knew was coming. She met with a lawyer, quietly gathering the necessary documents to protect herself and the kids. Each meeting left her feeling a mix of dread and resolve. Ethan, ever the manipulator, seemed to sense her movements. Though he said nothing instead, he played his own game, making subtle changes to their finances and locking down access to their shared accounts. One evening, as the kids were upstairs and the house was unusually quiet, Ethan made his move. Lila was sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing Caleb's soccer schedule, when he walked in, a manila folder in his hand. We need to talk, he said, his tone unusually calm. Lila looked up, immediately on edge. What is it now? Ethan sat across from her, sliding the folder across the table. It's all there, a fair arrangement for the kids, the house, everything. She opened the folder, scanning the papers quickly. Her stomach churned as she read the details, joint custody of the kids, but with him holding primary decision-making power. The house, to be sold, with the proceeds split, but only after he recouped his financial contributions. It was all wrapped in legal jargon, but the message was clear. Ethan intended to leave her with as little as possible. This isn't fair, she said, her voice shaking. It's more than fair, Ethan countered, leaning back in his chair. You're the one who stepped out of this marriage, Lila. I'm giving you an out, but don't mistake my generosity for weakness. Lila's anger flared. Generosity? You've done nothing but control and belittle me for years, Ethan. And now you think you can just dictate how this ends? Ethan's calm facade cracked for a moment, his eyes narrowing. Watch your tone, Lila. You're not in a position to make demands. That night, Lila made a decision. She wouldn't let Ethan win. Not this time. She reached out to Adam, not for support, but for closure. They met briefly, in a public park, where she explained her plans to move forward on her own. Adam, though disappointed, respected her resolve. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, he said before they parted. Don't let him take that away. The final confrontation between Lila and Ethan came unexpectedly, sparked by a chance encounter that neither of them could have anticipated. It was a Saturday afternoon, and Lila had taken Mia to a local cafe for a mother-daughter outing. As they laughed over pastries, Ethan walked in, his arm draped casually around another woman. Lila froze, her heart racing. The woman was younger, blonde, and wore the kind of expensive, understated clothing that screamed money. She looked like she belonged in Ethan's world. Mia, too engrossed in her cookie to notice, didn't see her mother's face pale. Ethan spotted Lila and smirked, his expression dripping with triumph. He didn't try to hide or explain. Instead, he approached their table with the woman in tow. "Lila," he said smoothly, "didn't expect to see you here." Lila's anger boiled, but she kept her composure for Mia's sake. Clearly. "This is Claire," Ethan said, gesturing to the woman. "She's not my business," Lila interrupted, her voice cold. "Mia, let's go." Mia looked up, confused. "But we just got here." "We'll get something to go," Lila said, grabbing her purse. "Now." Ethan's smirk grew as he stepped aside to let them pass. "See you at home, Lila." The encounter at the cafe was the final push Lila needed. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, she confronted Ethan in the living room. "You've been flaunting her in public?" she demanded, her voice low but furious. Ethan didn't deny it. "You have no right to judge me, not after Adam." "This isn't about Adam," she snapped. "This is about you, always thinking you can do whatever you want without consequences." Ethan stood, his expression hard. "You've made your bed. Lila, now lie in it." She stared at him, the years of anger and frustration bubbling to the surface. "You know what, Ethan? I will, but don't think for a second that I'm lying down quietly." The next day, Lila met with her lawyer and finalized her plans to file for divorce. She had gathered enough evidence of Ethan's financial manipulations and his affair to ensure a strong case. Her lawyer, a sharp and experienced woman named Marissa, was confident they could fight Ethan on equal footing. "You've got this," Marissa said, as Lila signed the final documents. "He thinks he's untouchable, but he's not." The climactic moment came during a mediation meeting, where both parties and their lawyers gathered to negotiate the terms of the divorce. Ethan, as expected, was smug and dismissive, while Lila remained calm and focused. As the discussions turned to the custody arrangement, Ethan leaned forward, his tone condescending. "Lila, be reasonable. You can't handle full custody. The kids need stability." Lila met his gaze, her voice steady. "And you think stability is parading your girlfriend around town while trying to cut me out of their lives?" Ethan's lawyer interjected, but Lila's lawyer silenced him with a wave. "If you're so confident in your position, Ethan, then why don't we bring up the financial discrepancies in your accounts, or the evidence of your affair?" Ethan's smirk faltered, his face tightening. "This is ridiculous." "No," Lila said, her voice firm. "This is me fighting back." The mediation ended with a tentative agreement that favored Lila more than Ethan had anticipated. As they left the room, Ethan pulled her aside, his expression dark. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "I think I'm finally free," Lila replied, walking away without looking back. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to see how this story reaches its resolution. The final chapter is coming, and you won't want to miss the aftermath of Lila's fight for freedom. The mediation might have ended in Lila's favor, but Ethan wasn't the kind of man to accept defeat quietly. For every step forward Lila took, Ethan found a way to push back. He began a subtle campaign to turn the kids against her. It started with little things, picking them up from school unannounced, taking them for extravagant outings without telling her. Slowly, he began planting seeds of doubt. "Your mom's been stressed lately," Ethan told Mia one evening as he dropped her off at home. "I'm just trying to make things easier for everyone." At first, Mia dismissed it, but Ethan's persistence began to wear on her. Lila could see it in the way her daughter avoided her eyes, the way Caleb hesitated before answering her questions. Ethan was trying to turn her own children into pawns, and it was working. Lila's frustration boiled over one evening when she came home to find Ethan in her kitchen, cooking dinner for the kids she hadn't invited him over, and his presence felt like an invasion. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Feeding my kids," Ethan replied casually, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "They told me you were working late, so I thought I'd help out." "I don't need your help," Lila snapped. "And you don't get to just show up here whenever you feel like it." Ethan turned to face her, his expression smug. "I'm their father, Lila. I'll show up wherever and whenever I need to." The argument escalated quickly, voices rising until Mia and Caleb came running into the kitchen, their faces pale with worry. "Stop it!" Mia shouted, tears streaming down her face. "Just stop fighting!" The room fell silent. Lila looked at her daughter, guilt washing over her like a tidal wave. This wasn't the life she wanted for her kids, and she couldn't let Ethan keep pulling the strings. The next morning, Lila sat down with her lawyer, Marissa, and laid everything on the table. She described Ethan's manipulative tactics, his attempts to alienate the kids, and the psychological toll it was taking on everyone. "We need to push harder," Lila said, her voice firm. "I won't let him do this to them." Marissa nodded, her eyes sharp. "We'll file for an emergency custody hearing. If we can prove he's trying to undermine your role as their mother, the court will take it seriously." Lila felt a flicker of hope, but she knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. The day of the custody hearing arrived, and the tension was palpable. Ethan arrived with his high-powered lawyer, looking every bit the picture of a concerned father. Lila, in contrast, felt small and vulnerable, but she refused to let it show. The courtroom became a battlefield. Ethan's lawyer painted him as a devoted father who only wanted what was best for his kids, while Lila was portrayed as unstable and distracted. But Marissa was relentless, dismantling Ethan's claims piece by piece. She presented evidence of his manipulative behavior, his financial deceit, and even his affair with Claire. When it was Lila's turn to speak, she took a deep breath and looked directly at the judge. "All I want is to protect my children," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Ethan has used them as weapons in his fight against me. He doesn't care about what's best for them. He only cares about winning." Ethan's face darkened, but he said nothing. The judge listened carefully, his expression unreadable. The decision came 2 days later. Lila was granted primary custody, with Ethan allowed supervised visitation until he completed a parenting course. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough to give Lila the space she needed to rebuild her life. Ethan's reaction was swift and brutal. He showed up at Lila's house unannounced, pounding on the door until she answered. "This isn't over," he hissed, his eyes blazing with anger. "You think you've won, but you haven't." Lila stood her ground, her hand gripping the doorframe for support. "Go home, Ethan. You're only making this worse for yourself." He glared at her for a moment longer before turning and storming off. Lila watched him go, her heart pounding. She knew he wasn't done, but she also knew she couldn't let him intimidate her anymore. In the weeks that followed, Lila began to reclaim her life. She enrolled Mia in a new art class and signed Caleb up for a summer soccer camp. She started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. Slowly but surely, the pieces of her broken life began to come together. Adam reached out once, but Lila didn't respond. She needed to focus on herself and her kids, and she wasn't ready to invite anyone else into her world just yet. Ethan, meanwhile, kept his distance. The custody ruling had been a blow to his ego, and for the first time, he seemed to realize that he couldn't control everything. Lila didn't trust his silence, but she was grateful for the reprieve. The final turning point came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Lila was in the backyard, watching Mia and Caleb play, when Ethan arrived. He stood at the edge of the yard, his hands in his pockets, looking more subdued than she had ever seen him. "I just want to talk," he said, his voice lacking its usual edge. Lila hesitated but nodded. She walked over to him, keeping a safe distance. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, surprising her. "For everything I let my anger get the best of me. And I hurt you. I hurt the kids." Lila searched his face for sincerity and found a glimmer of it. "Why now?" "Because I lost," he admitted. "And maybe that's what I needed to see things clearly." She didn't forgive him, not yet, maybe not ever, but she appreciated the gesture. It was a small step toward peace, and that was enough for now. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you've been captivated by this journey. The resolution is coming, and it's one you won't want to miss. Ethan's apology lingered in the air like a faint echo, but Lila wasn't ready to let her guard down. She had learned the hard way that his remorse could be fleeting, a tool wielded only when he needed something in return. That night, she replayed their conversation in her mind, torn between the hope of peace and the fear of falling into his traps again. The next day brought the unexpected turning point. Lila received an email from Claire, the young woman Ethan had been seeing. At first, she considered deleting it, but curiosity won out. The message was brief, but packed a punch. "Lila, I need to talk. It's important I know the truth about Ethan. Please, meet me. Claire." The truth about Ethan. The words stirred something deep inside her. What could Claire possibly know that she didn't? Against her better judgment, Lila agreed to meet at a nearby coffee shop. When Lila arrived, Claire was already there, sitting nervously at a corner table. She looked younger than Lila had realized, almost fragile, her polished exterior barely concealing the anxiety beneath. "Thank you for coming," Claire said as Lila sat down. "I wasn't sure you'd even read my message." "What is this about, Claire?" Lila asked, her tone cautious. Claire hesitated, glancing around the room before leaning in. "Ethan. He's not who you think he is." Lila raised an eyebrow. "Trust me, I know who Ethan is." "No, you don't," Claire insisted. "He's been using me, just like he's been using you." Lila froze. "Using you for what?" Claire took a deep breath. "Ethan's been funneling money into an account in my name. At first, I thought it was just a gift. You know, something to keep me happy. But then I found out he's been hiding assets from you. If the divorce went through, he planned to claim he was broke." The revelation hit Lila like a punch to the gut. She had suspected Ethan was playing dirty, but this was on another level entirely. "Why are you telling me this?" Lila asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I'm done being his pawn," Claire said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I didn't know what I was getting into with him, but now I just want out." Lila leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. If Claire's claims were true, it could change everything. But trusting Claire meant taking a risk, a big one. "Do you have proof?" Lila asked. Claire nodded, pulling a flash drive from her purse. "Everything's on here, bank statements, emails, transactions. It's all there." That night, Lila sat in her living room, staring at the flash drive in her hand. She knew this could be the key to finally breaking free from Ethan's grip, but it also meant diving deeper into the mess he had created. After a moment of hesitation, she plugged the drive into her laptop. The files were damning dozens of transactions, all leading back to a hidden account in Claire's name. It was clear Ethan had been siphoning money for months, preparing to shield his wealth from the divorce settlement. And the emails. The way he spoke about Lila and the kids, cold and calculating, made her blood boil. The next morning, Lila called Marissa, her lawyer. "I have something you need to see," she said. Marissa's office was a flurry of activity as they prepared to file a motion to freeze Ethan's accounts. The evidence Claire provided was airtight, and Marissa was confident they could use it to turn the tide in Lila's favor. "This is a game changer," Marissa said, flipping through the documents. "But we need to move fast. Once Ethan realizes we have this, he'll try to cover his tracks. Lila nodded, her resolve hardening. She was done letting Ethan control the narrative. It was time to fight back, and this time, she had the upper hand. The confrontation came sooner than expected. Ethan stormed into Lila's house that evening, his face twisted with rage. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded, slamming the door behind him. Lila stood her ground, her arms crossed. "I'm protecting myself and our kids." "You think you're so clever," Ethan sneered. "But you've made a big mistake. You don't want to play this game with me, Lila." "This isn't a game," she shot back, her voice steady. "This is my life, and I'm done letting you ruin it." Ethan took a step closer, his anger radiating off him in waves. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." "No," Lila said, her gaze unwavering. "You're the one who doesn't understand I'm not afraid of you anymore." For a moment, they stood in silence, the tension crackling between them like a live wire. Then Ethan turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Lila sank onto the couch, her hands trembling, but her heart filled with a new sense of strength. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal battles and emotional upheaval. The court froze Ethan's accounts, preventing him from accessing his hidden funds. Marissa used the evidence to strengthen Lila's case, painting a clear picture of Ethan's deceit and manipulation. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. Claire, she testified in court, providing first-hand accounts of Ethan's schemes and corroborating the evidence Lila had presented. Her courage in stepping forward added weight to Lila's claims, and the judge took notice. The climax of the custody battle came during the final hearing. Ethan, stripped of his usual confidence, tried to defend his actions, but the evidence was too damning. Lila, on the other hand, spoke with clarity and conviction, her love for her children shining through every word. When the judge delivered the final ruling, granting Lila full custody and awarding her the house, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. Ethan's visitation rights were limited and closely monitored, ensuring he could no longer manipulate the kids against her. For the first time in years, Lila felt a sense of freedom. She had fought for her children, for herself, and she had won. As she stood on the front porch of her home, watching Mia and Caleb play in the yard, she realized that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter she would write on her own terms. Make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you've been captivated by Lila's journey. There's more to uncover in the aftermath of her victory, and you won't want to miss how she rebuilds her life from the ground up. Lila stood in the kitchen, gazing out the window as the morning sun spilled across the backyard. It was the same view she'd looked at for years, but today, it felt different. For the first time, the weight on her chest wasn't there. The house, once a battlefield of tension and manipulation, now felt like a sanctuary. The kids were playing outside, their laughter filling the air. Mia had recently taken up painting, a hobby inspired by Lila, and Caleb was preparing for an upcoming soccer tournament. They were thriving, and Lila couldn't have been prouder. It wasn't perfect. They still had questions about their father, and some days were harder than others, but they were healing together. Ethan, on the other hand, had faded into the background. After the court ruling, he had retreated, his arrogance finally broken. The limited visitation rights and financial penalties left him bitter, but he no longer had the power to dictate Lila's life. Occasionally, he would send emails about the kids, formal and devoid of the venom he once carried. Lila answered them when necessary, but her responses were polite and curt. He was no longer a presence in her life, just a distant reminder of the man she had once trusted. Claire, too, had moved on. After her testimony, she disappeared from the scene, quietly closing the chapter on her involvement with Ethan. Before she left, she sent Lila one last message. Thank you for giving me the courage to stand up to him. I hope you find the happiness you deserve. Lila wasn't sure she and Claire would ever cross paths again, but she was grateful for the strange and unexpected ally she had found during her darkest moments. In the months that followed, Lila began rebuilding her life piece by piece. She found a new rhythm, balancing work at the community center with time spent painting and creating. Her artwork, once a private escape, began to garner attention. A local gallery offered her the chance to display her pieces in an upcoming exhibition, an opportunity she never would have dreamed of before. Her confidence grew with each small victory. The woman who had once felt trapped and invisible was now stepping into her own light. She was stronger, wiser, and no longer afraid to speak her mind. One day, as she was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. Lila opened the door to find Adam standing there, a bouquet of sunflowers in his hand. She hadn't seen him since their last conversation at the park. "Adam," she said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I heard about the custody ruling," he said, his voice warm. "I just wanted to say congratulations." "Thank you," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "It's been a journey." They talked over coffee, their conversation easy and familiar. Adam didn't push, didn't ask for anything more than her company, and for that, Lila was grateful. She wasn't sure if she was ready for anything new, but she appreciated his presence. As he left, he turned to her with a small smile. "You're doing great, Lila. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Lila watched him go, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. The night of the gallery exhibition arrived, and Lila stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by her artwork and a crowd of supporters. Friends, neighbors, and even her kids were there, cheering her on. She wore a simple black dress, her hair pinned back, and a radiant smile that lit up the room. As she looked around, she realized how far she had come. The woman who had once doubted her worth now stood tall, proud of her accomplishments. She had faced betrayal, manipulation, and heartbreak, but she had emerged stronger. Mia tugged on her arm, pulling her toward one of the paintings. "Mom, this one's my favorite," she said, pointing to a vibrant canvas filled with bold colors and sweeping strokes. "It's beautiful," Caleb added, grinning. "Just like you, Mom." Lila's heart swelled as she hugged them both. In that moment, she knew she had everything she needed. As the night wound down, Lila stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The city lights sparkled in the distance, and the cool breeze brushed against her skin. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain, the growth, the lessons learned. She had lost so much, but she had gained even more. The future was uncertain, but Lila was no longer afraid of it. She was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing she had the strength to face it head-on. And that's the story of how Lila Graham reclaimed her life. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was one that taught her the value of resilience, self-worth, and the power of starting over. Sometimes, the most beautiful beginnings come from the most painful endings. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel for more captivating recaps like this one. There's always another story to tell, and I can't wait to share it with you. See you next time.